Next.js 15.1 brings new core upgrades, new APIs. So first off, biggest and most important improvement is React 19 stable. I am so happy that we no longer have RC versions and type overrides in our package JSON. It was worth it just for that. Of course, there's lots of other great improvements with React 19 for the whole ecosystem, but it is nice to have the stable version out with a lot of juicy improvements. We're going to talk through some of those. We've been working on making the errors in Next.js better, including source maps, both in the browser and in the terminal. And then we also have some new stabilized APIs as well as experimental APIs. I see a comment on the right. Is this on Twitch or YouTube as well? Absolutely. Cross streaming to wherever you prefer to watch your live content. And hopefully now with this new sidebar on the right, should get the chat messages from everybody. So one of the APIs we released a while ago is called After. That's now stabilized, and we'll talk through that. And then forbidden and unauthorized are two new experimental APIs and file conventions that we'll talk through as well. With Next.js 15, we actually released this automated upgrade CLI that makes it much easier to move between versions and will prompt you to run the relevant code mods when necessary. So yes, you can upgrade manually or start a new project, but if you're coming from Next.js 14, would definitely recommend using the upgrade CLI, trying to make that process iteratively better over time. Okay, React 19 stable. Next.js 15.1 now fully supports React 19. So if you're on the pages router and you wanted to use React 19, that is now possible. Notably, you can continue to use React 18 on the pages router if you would like, but you now have the option if you want to go to the React 19 world, which has some nice benefits. If you're in the app router is built on a React release channel for frameworks. So the way this works is it kind of builds off the stable changes in the React releases like React 19. And then we also can validate and have our own semantic versioning inside of Next.js for some of the new features that we're cooking on in conjunction with the React team. So we'll still be able to test out some new features and release them under Next.js Semver inside of the app router. If you really want to dig into some of the React 19 details, you can learn a little bit more about sibling pre-warming. It's kind of more relevant, I think, for library authors, but I think it's awesome to see a lot of the work that went in behind the scenes with React 19, and this was sparked from some work the React Query team asked about, so very excited to see that. Definitely check out the React 19 blog post. There's a lot of good stuff in here. If you've been building with the app router, you're going to notice a lot of these things, but the great part is that the same programming model applies to both the client and the server. So actions, you can have client actions and you can have server actions. When you're using use optimistic, you can fetch your data in a server component and then forward it to a client component and use it with use optimistic. All of the transitions or all of the navigations inside of the Next.js app router are built on React transitions. So a lot of these things should look pretty familiar if you've been hacking around on the Next.js app router for some time. Definitely give this whole post a read. It's probably outside of the scope of what we'll do here. Unless you really want to hear me talk about React 19, we can definitely do that. But for now, I'm going to keep on rolling in this blog post. Improved error debugging. You know, when something goes wrong and you get an error, it can be very frustrating, and there's an infinite amount of work that we want to do to make that experience better, both how we display the errors on screen, the information that we send back, the stack traces, how you can debug and integrate into your editor. There's a lot of stuff we want to do here. And we've been cooking on improving errors, improving source maps, and we also have some future improvements coming to improve the overall error display as well and give it a little design refresh. The best part here is everything that I'm talking about, all these changes apply to both Webpack and TurboPack. And in case you missed it, in Next.js 15, TurboPack is now stable. So it's not the default. You can still opt in when you're ready, but we've been using it for some time now, and we've seen generally a lot more folks adopting it across the ecosystem. So we were ready for throwing the stable mark on here and getting broader feedback. So if you turn it on and you have feedback, definitely let me know. Source map enhancements. So errors are now easier to trace back to their origin through the improved use of source maps. We are using this ignore list property for source map, which allows Next.js to hide stack frames from external or for external dependencies, making your application code the primary focus of what you're looking at on screen and what you're debugging. For slightly more accurate source mapping of method names, we suggest adopting TurboPack, which is now stable, which has improved error handling and detection of source maps over Webpack. So this is one of the advantages of us starting to cook on our own compilation system that's kind of being incubated inside of Next.js with TurboPack, is we can really fine tune some of these things with a fresh set of eyes on improving the developer experience. So I'm really, really looking forward to this one. The ignore list source map extension. Sorry, everyone that was just blinded by light mode here. DevTools parses the ignore list field in source maps to improve the debugging experience. Nice. Okay, let's see if there's another example. Seems like a small win, but an important win, especially just even looking at this example. Like that's pretty nice. That's pretty nice. It helps you determine what is your application code versus the library or framework code. Okay, collapsed stack frames. Hello in the chat. It would be awesome if Next.js had its own auth system. It would make it the GOAT. Incomplete. Well, you know what? I'm going to talk about one template that has auth built in, which I think is interesting. Yeah, light mode in this economy? Come on. It's got to be dark mode. It's funny because I accidentally flashbang myself with light mode all the time. Generally more of a dark mode person, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, collapsed stack frames. We've improved the logic for collapsing stack frames to highlight the most relevant parts of your code. So third-party dependencies get hidden and collapsed by default. We have a screenshot down below we'll get to, but again, it just helps you focus on your application code. You really want to see the things that are relevant to you and probably not something that you're not changing, like a third-party dependency. But of course, if you want to, you can still show the ignored frames and still dig into things potentially coming from a third party. That's in the browser or in the error overlay that pops up in Next.js. But then we also have improvements in the terminal. Third-party dependency frames are collapsed by default, and the error formatting now aligns the same way with the browser output, so it's kind of consistent whichever environment you're in, client or server. Errors are replayed in the browser to ensure you don't miss important information. This is kind of building off the work that's been happening with the React Dev tools to also show your logging in the browser when it's happening on a server component, prefixed with a little server badge. So, whether you're in the server, whether you're in the client, whether you're, in the terminal, like a server-like environment, or in the browser, a client-like environment, we want to provide similar tools. Enhanced profiling. Ignored stack frames are now also recognized by built-in browser profiles. This makes profiling your application easier, allowing you to pinpoint slow functions in your code without noise from external libraries. Nice. And then the last bit here, if you're using the Edge runtime, aka middleware, errors are now displayed a little bit better across environments, which makes debugging a little bit easier. Previously, it would only include the message and not the full stack. So if you're debugging middleware errors, that's going to help out. Okay, here's an example. So here is a before with your terminal, and then here is after. So there's a lot of underlying bits here, like the Node.js async local storage. And in the after, it's like, okay, it's pretty clear this is coming from application code. So that's nice. Same thing basically with the error overlay where it's been collapsed down and it's just the app page.tsx. So that's nice. These improvements make errors clearer and more intuitive, allow you to focus on building your app rather than debugging. Yes, we're going to be redesigning the UI here in an upcoming release. I've seen some sneak peeks of this. I've seen the designs. I think it's awesome. I think you're going to love it. It's a nice, clean refresh on where we're headed. So that's going to be a good one. Let me pause and remind folks who are tuning in live, if you want to ask questions about the release, definitely let me know. I'm going to be here answering questions on all platforms, X, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, and we're also going to look at some code here in a little bit for moving an application to Next.js 15.1. So feel free to drop them in the chat or replies, and we'll get to it. Let's keep rocking and rolling. What's my current NeoVim setup? Am I still liking it? Boy, do I have some code to show you, because we're gonna show that next once we get into some code. But I can talk through it a little bit. Can you release a canary every time you release a stable release? That's a good point. When you use PPR, you need the canary version. So if you bump to 15.1, now you need to get the latest canary. You know, the nice thing here is that generally we release multiple canaries a week. So let's see what the cadence looks like. We've already got one ready, so it should be going out here pretty soon. But I wonder if there's an easy way. Look at all this stuff. There's a lot, by the way, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the releases that doesn't make it into the blog post. It's hard to just distill every single thing that we want to include. We try to make it very high signal because not everybody cares about every single one of these things. But if you really want to dig into, every single bug fix, everything is published in the releases here, and we try our best to make the commit messages as helpful as possible. But yeah, so we generally, especially on release day, we cut a lot of canaries, but we should have another canary up. Hopefully, maybe even today or tomorrow. So Julius, we'll get something out for you to keep using PPR. Why Ghosty and not iTerm 2 or Warp? No preference really. I really wanted to help beta test Ghosty before its public release, which I think is happening very soon. I don't do any of the fancy terminal features. I'm a very basic terminal user, and I was like, I like the design of this one. I'm going to use it. And it's worked well for that. But iTerm or Warp or any of the other really fast terminals, Alacrity, I think they're all great. Is there a plan for Dino integration? So with Next.js 15, you should be able to use Dino alongside of Next.js. I think their team published an example, which is nice. So that's worth checking out. Definitely let me know if you check that out. Okay, after API, we've talked about this one before, so this might be old news for some of you, but if you haven't heard of it, it's now stable in Next.js 15.1. It allows you to do some work in the background, basically. So maybe sending information to a logging provider or sending some analytics to a provider. Basically, after the response is finished streaming, you can just continue doing something without blocking that primary response. Since we launched it and we were getting initial feedback, there's been a couple main areas we've wanted to improve. One is just chatting with folks who are self-hosting and wanting to figure out how they would best like to use this API. So we've improved support if you're on your own server, and we've also made it easier to extend for other platforms, other like serverless platforms or folks building on Next.js to provide their own primitives to hook into wait until. And you can also use other runtime APIs like cookies and headers inside now, whether that's in like server actions or a route handler. So some small but large improvements there to stabilize after and make it generally more useful and broadly applicable for any Next.js application. Why do people say Next image gives them high bills? Do you recommend using the HTML image tag instead for people hosting outside of Vercel? Good question. Which, by the way, I need to change the ordering of the. Well, maybe not. It's a little weird that the newest message comes in on top. I should probably flip that and then put my chat up at the top. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that the current billing model of image optimization on Vercel is not as obvious as it could be. And I think we might we would like to make some changes here to make this a little bit more obvious. Generally, though, the way it works is the metric that you're looking at is a source image. So even if you have, 12 or 20 different transformations on a single source image, you're charged based on the number of source images. That is good in some instances, but we have found that it's a little bit confusing when a lot of other similar image optimization services price based on transforms, which is almost more of like a compute-like pricing. So we're exploring options here to find something that is a little bit easier for folks to use. If you have strong feedback on this, please send me a DM. I'd love to hear about it. But you can always configure the Next.js image component to really go wherever you want. So let's see. There's this loader, which you can pass a prop directly and define the loader you want, or you can set up a loader file, which is in the next config. And then this is basically setting up the custom loader for every single image component in your application. And then you can point it, wherever you want. This could be your own self-hosted server that's doing image optimization, which I talked a little bit about in our self-hosting video. Or it could be a cloud service if you prefer. So TLDR, we're hoping to simplify the experience on Vercel, but also there's really no good reason to use the vanilla image tag, because even if you don't want any image optimization, you can just pass, I think it's enabled. I don't remember what the name of the prop is. That's not what I want. Enabled? It's optimized, I think. Unoptimized. You can just pass the unoptimized prop if you don't want to optimize images. You might be wondering, okay, well, why do I use the image if I'm not optimizing it? The image component also helps you maintain aspect ratio and prevent CLS. You can do this yourself if you kind of hand roll your own image and get the CSS right. It's just sometimes not always easy to do, especially when you're considering multiple screen sizes. So yeah, if you know what you're doing, go ahead. But we're just trying to make it easy and prevent foot guns. That's API, or that's after the after API. Other questions? Oh, the chat already knew, unoptimized. Y'all are way ahead of me. Node runtime for middleware included or will come in the future. We're still working on this. We shared a few updates. We've been testing this out right now, and it seems to be going well. So we will hopefully have this out in a future release. But yes, we are actively working on that. The unoptimized prop prevents image optimization usage. Yep, absolutely. It just doesn't. It won't optimize your source images, which, by the way, if you want, it's still a valid option to just run some kind of node script during the build to run your images through an optimization service. Or, if you only have a few images, you can just do it by hand as well. You can drop it in a image optimization tool and then drop it in a public folder in your application. So there's a bunch of options here depending on the type of application you're building. Okay, forbidden and unauthorized. We've got two new experimental APIs based on your feedback. So please let us know when you try these out. If you've used not found before, which is how you trigger a 404. So you have some page like this, not found, which is some UI that's routable. And then you use not found and you can route directly to that page. So, you go to find a user and there's no user, then I want to go to a not found, which is, you can kind of think about it like a 404. Forbidden and unauthorized are similar status code like pairings. So forbidden is kind of like a 403 with its own UI file to route to, and unauthorized is kind of like a 401 with an unauthorized file. Now, it's important to mention, just like with not found and with all these APIs, status codes are a little different with streaming because you can't change the status code after the initial response headers have been set. So it kind of depends on what your application looks like in terms of your streaming setup. But generally, this isn't an issue, the way we've architected Next.js and our streaming architecture. So Just wanted to mention that as well if you're wondering how that works. How to enable the feature. You basically flip the experimental flag on in your config and you're good to go, which we're going to look at in the app that I'm kind of hacking on. And by the way, in case you missed it, Next.js 15 supports Next.config TS, which my goal is to get every single file in my file tree I need these all to be TS. We're not there yet, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there one day. Okay, so let's look at some code examples for what these look like. So we're looking at a session. If they don't have the right role, aka they're unauthorized for something, you can use forbidden or unauthorized. That makes sense. Like they don't have access here to get that object, and then they get routed to this forbidden route, and then unauthorized, similar. So pretty straightforward if you've seen not found. It's like the same pattern of these functions that build on async local storage in Node.js. They build off the requests and then can get routed to specific bits of UI with file system-based routing. And that's pretty much that there. Hey, how's it going, Lee? It's going well. It's release day, so you got to love that. Next.js release day, and we're live talking about it, so that's fun. So it's going well. In the unauthorized doc, it says, if no session exists, return a 401 and render unauthorized. So the API will return the unauthorized HTML. Yeah, so for this example, which you could sub out forbidden with unauthorized, the code is like evaluating like this. It gets to this block. It says, okay, they're not an admin, so it's forbidden. You can think about this kind of like a redirect. It's going to redirect and show this bit of UI that's defined in your file system. So yeah, which ORM do you prefer? Well, I'm going to show you an app I'm building here that's using Drizzle, and we can talk through some of the code for that here in a minute. Clerk has been kind of cooking with us on this feature so they can build it into their Next.js library for authentication and authorization. So if you're a library author out there building something in the auth space, definitely let us know. We're happy to work on that together with you. And we've got some other changes, laundry list of things that I think are important. Probably the most relevant to talk through would be CSS inlining support. This is something that I know has been wanted by a number of people on GitHub, and we now have an experimental option for this. It works particularly well if you're using something like Tailwind, which compiles down to one CSS file anyway. So worth checking that out. Another one here that you might want to know about is if you were using TurboPack with MDX plugins, works a little bit better now. So if you ran into that, that's an improvement we've made there. That is it. That's the blog post, and we're going to talk through some code now. But first, just a shout out to everyone who's helped on this release, as well as, of course, the folks on the Next.js and TurboPack team, and our folks writing docs. So thank you, everybody who's helped with this release in the community and at Vercel. That's 15.1. Just a small iterative improvement over the Next.js 15 changes, which if there's things in Next.js 15 that you missed, we could talk about those too. ESLint 9 mentioned. That's one that was also very much requested in Next.js 15. And another question, I understand for server components, but for route handlers, would it render unauthorized too? Yeah, it would. Actually, I see what you're saying. If I navigate to like /API/my app and I called the unauthorized function, would it route to the UI that has unauthorized? We should test that. My assumption is yes, it would do that. But we can find out. All right, I'm going to pull up some code and we can start talking about some practical examples here. And then, yeah, if you have questions, let me know. And we'll just, we'll get rocking and rolling. I still don't know the right way that I'm going to work with this multi setup here with chat and my code and the browser, but yeah, we're just gonna kind of wing it and see what happens. So the app that I have here, I've talked about it a few times on stream before, but I'll just give a super quick overview of what it is. You want to build a SaaS app. We all do. We want to, live in Bali and make $100,000 a month. That sounds great. But you need a way to do it. And there are some paid templates you can use, which I think are nice and can, simplify things. I wanted to build a version of that is not super full featured. It's not got all the bells and whistles, but it shows how to do some patterns in Next.js the way that I think are the correct way of doing them and the way I'd recommend to build apps, namely authentication and using an ORM and using forms, for example. And we can just try, for example, signing up with a really fancy email address here. Great one. And we're going to log in. We're going to get our dashboard. We can invite people to our team. We can go in and change the name on our account, which reflects here. We see all the team activity. We can change our password, and we can go into Stripe too. And let's say I want the $12 a month plan, for example. We can kind of get all of this here. So it's got integrations with a lot of stuff: database, auth, Stripe, all sorts of good stuff. And this code base, I just recently updated it to React 19, but it's not on, let's see, where are we at here? We're on Next.js 15.0.4 Canary. So let's go ahead and I think we might run into what Julius was saying in the chat, which is if I do next at Canary, I don't think we have a Canary release yet other than 15.1.0. And right now, this app is using, let's see. Oh, okay. So it went to the last Canary before 15.1, which that's fine for all intents and purposes of this app because I'm using PPR. So we'll keep it for that. But it's basically 15.1. Well, you'll notice I already updated here. That is the best quality of life change, as I mentioned, is that I have React 19 for React and React DOM. And then my types, I also have these new versions without having to overwrite anything. So that is great. That is a very nice quality of life change. Some other stuff just quickly on this repo so you know kind of what we're working with. I'm using ShadCN UI for all of the UI, which means I'm using things like Radix and Tailwind. I'm rolling my own auth, which is just still using libraries like bcrypt for password hashing and Jose for the JWT handling. And then I'm using Stripe and Drizzle for my Postgres database. That's pretty much it. That's the stack. Yeah, no more weird RC packages. I'm very happy with that. Why not redirect the user straight to checkout after the sign up? It's a good question. There's a world where you want to get them to immediately sign up for a plan. What I had started with here is like you could technically go into the app on the free tier and start inviting people, and then you're going to get prompted to actually upgrade and use the plan when you try to do anything more advanced. So you could kind of structure it either way. It's nice to release a new version, but what about dependencies like Lucid React that are not capable? So most things now should be capable with React 19 that I've been seeing because there's been a lot of activity in the community. So shout out to all the library authors who have been making updates here. But it's true that not everything will be updated yet. If you spot things that are still kind of lagging behind, definitely let us know. And I'll try to work with the library authors, maintainers there to get those updated and supported. And yeah, Biome's great, by the way. Biome's great. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things that were in this latest release and see where we could use them in our application. I'm going to pull up the blog post again. This is way too big. I'm going to pull up this blog post again. What should we try out first? We already updated the latest version. It's kind of hard to demo errors. We could try to just make some errors and see what happens. We'll probably run into an error as we go anyway. But one thing I did want to try was forbidden and unauthorized, because there is one spot in my app where I'm pretty much doing this that I think could be better. So let's go to my next config. I've already got an experimental property. Let's add in auth interrupts. We'll make that true. Cool. So my server restarts. Awesome. I'm using TurboPack. And then let's look at what this could look like. So I'm trying to remember where it's at. I think maybe middleware. So the protected route is our dashboard. And if you try to go to the protected route or there isn't a cookie, we're redirecting to sign in. And I don't know if these work from middleware yet. I see server actions, server components, and client components. So maybe we'll want to look at another example. I think on the dashboard, what do we got here? In the page, no, the layout, was it in the layout? We get the user. Oh yeah, we have a user hook. I think I might do something in here. Okay. So by the way, if you haven't seen this pattern, it's kind of interesting. Let me explain this pattern. In the root layout of my application, while I'm here, another interesting thing. If you've ever seen when you click on an input on mobile iOS Safari and it zooms in, this is an easy fix for that because the font size needs to be 16 point, or you need to have this meta tag for maximum scale. In my root layout, I have this promise to get the user. And you notice I'm not awaiting it. I'm just getting the promise, and then I'm forwarding it to this user provider. This is a newer pattern with React 19, but if I go into this user provider, it's React context. I use this is the favorite thing to say. I use the use hook. I use the use hook from React's use. And what that allows you to do is unwrap the promise, which is just a fancy way of saying, okay, now we await it. But it's awaiting it in a kind of synchronous-like component. This isn't an async component. It's a client component, right? Because we have context. So we're able to get that value here without having to do like the use effect shenanigans. And we set the user, and then we have access to it anywhere in our app, which is pretty awesome. So back here in this header component, we have use user, where we can read the user, and we don't have to do anything magic. We just read it from context. Pretty nice. And this also means you don't have to go through and try to make every single thing in your application a server component, which is not really the goal. But in here, maybe there's an example. Let's see. What happens in get user? How about this? If you have a session cookie and there's no session cookie, or there's no value, right now we are returning null. Just beautiful error handling there. I really thought through every edge case here. So if you're not logged in, then I think what probably makes the most sense here is unauthorized. Let's try that. And this is just like not found. It throws internally, which is why it has this TypeScript never type. So I don't even think we need to do return. The control flow should just pick that up, that it knows it will handle that. Okay, where else in here? Verify the token. I have a lot of like TypeScripty checks in here. If there's no user, I guess a lot of this could probably be simplified at the top, but yeah, sure, we'll do that. Let me try to find a way to test this out. So if we don't have a session cookie and you try to access get user, it should just go to unauthorized, which means that inside of my app, and this right now, if you haven't seen these parentheses before, these are route groups, and the route groups mean that you can bucket code in the folder without it necessarily affecting the routable structure of your application. So we have our root layout. We have API, which means literally /API. But then inside of login, this doesn't put the words login in the URL that I route to, but it still allows me to like have a different layout for the dashboard and a different layout for the login. So let me, let's do let's do unauthorized.tsx here. And we'll just take this, paste this in. Sure. We could probably do some better styles there, but we'll call that good for now. Okay, so you would think, well, actually, this is a good question. I might have this wrong. In that hook, if we're fetching the user, that doesn't mean that I necessarily want to go to unauthorized, because I want to allow the logged out state. Logged out is fine. So maybe I actually want to place this somewhere differently. If I go back to, what was that, queries? Yeah, so if I get user, which I'm going to get the user when I load this page, if that returns null, I don't necessarily want to route to unauthorized, which it looks like we went to the 401 here, and I'm guessing my CSS is just bad. Let's see. I might need to move that in the route group. That's a good question. I think generally though, this is not what I want, because I want to be able to load the route even though I'm not logged in. So let me go back and find. I want to be able to load this and still show the sign up or sign in buttons. So instead, I probably want this somewhere like dashboard, where if I'm trying to access this dashboard route or this layout, for example, it just doesn't really make sense if I'm in here, right? I shouldn't be able to access this page if I'm unauthorized. And one thing that allows you to do is potentially move some of this control logic out of your top level middleware and down into the routes a bit lower. So for example, I think what we could do is going back to middleware. Let's try, where else are we using is protected route inside of here? Is protected route. So what we could do is we could just make this the session check for now, which means I should be able to go to dashboard. And then I think the check down here was going back to, oh, I deleted too much. Get rid of that. I think I'm stuck in a redirect loop now. Let me go back to here. Oh, let's see. What is sign in doing? Oops. What is sign in doing? Sign in. So sign in, do I have somewhere that's redirecting me back, or was this in middleware? Oh, well, this check is still valid. If there's no session cookie, then cool. Let's try that again. I really just want to demonstrate what this even looks like. So I go to localhost. I go directly to dashboard. Now, man, I've got so many checks in this app. This sign-in check is somewhere, it's lower in my app. I think it's in this file. So this is an interesting pattern you might have not seen as well, which is I'm wrapping server actions. So I have an action that I want to validate and say, hey, it needs to match some Zod schema, which I can just basically wrap the server action function with this value. But then I have another one, validated action with user. And if you get the user, it's going to throw an error and say, hey, this user is not authenticated, which is pretty neat. And then I also think, let's see, one of the pages, I think maybe it is it's this one. If you try to go to the settings page, like getting a user, and you don't have a user, right now I'm doing that control logic here with sign in, but this is actually one of the better examples where, hey, I don't have a user. What I really want here is unauthorized. Oops. And let's just go ahead and delete that. Sure. And let me go back to here. Go to dashboard. I'm now getting a 401 and let's see. Does it have the content in here? So right now, you're not authorized to view this page, unauthorized. I think what I need to do is actually take this and move it. So I'm going to delete this file. Let's go inside of here, unauthorized.tsx, and we'll paste this in. Default export is not a React component. Okay. So now that we have the file system route inside of our route group, when we're going from the dashboard page here, so the settings page, if there is not a user, go to unauthorized, which kind of gives that 401, and we took over the default behavior, which you saw the default title, the default error message, which my CSS styles were overriding the colors for, so you couldn't see the text. We take that, and I guess there isn't really anything in the definition to show, but we route back to this unauthorized file. And just to really paint the picture here, we could do oh no's, you are unauthorized. Nice. So that's just a little bit better way of, rather than doing this, you might want to control something on this page that looks differently than just redirecting to sign in. It's nice that those options are built in, although I will say it's probably a bit more of an advanced pattern. It's one of those things where it's nice to have additional APIs. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to learn and use every single API. Questions in the chat. You can cut and paste files with the X key. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've tried that before. I know you can move, but when you move, you have to get the relative file pathing all right. It's kind of annoying. Just joined. Speaking about server actions, we should talk about the server actions here a little bit as well, which I think is interesting. Let me sign back in. Another fake email here. Ask Zed or an AI to trace your validations. That's a good idea. I have the AI plugin for NeoVim, which has worked decently well up until now, but I'm excited to try out Zed a little bit more. I've also been using Cursor too. Is there any property to hide the source code? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. If you want to clarify. Does using the promise in a client component expose the client credentials, API keys? No, it doesn't. And this is kind of a cool thing where you can still have your server-side call where you're connecting to your database or something. In this example, we're getting our user from the database, and it's basically streaming back the results. So it's not hard coding in some API key in your client JavaScript bundle or anything like that. You're still taking advantage of the server to stream that value back. Really interesting pattern. Another question is, if we fetch some example, some user data we know did not change, and we go from one page to another, and then come back, is there a way we can cache this on the client without React Query? So I think what you're asking for is, let's say I'm on here and I go to the activity page and then I come back to this page. How do I make sure that this data is cached? Well, it's actually the default behavior of Next.js where after you fetch that behavior and you're either defining that you want the data to be cached using the options on fetch or the unstable cache function, which will soon go to the use cache directive. You don't have to configure anything here. It's going to do that by default for you. So you don't have to pull in an external dependency for client-side cache management. But there were some questions about server actions. So we should talk about server actions while we're still here cooking, because I think the pattern here is, I think it's a little interesting. So specifically the login actions, there's a bug here that I want to fix that a lot of people have mentioned. It's kind of a confusing point with React 19 and Next.js. So let me show you an example. I'm going to type in test@test.com. This email already exists in the database. And I'm going to put in some password. And you're going to notice there's an error when I sign up. Failed to create user. But it reset my form. And this is the default way the browser works, is you submit a form and it reloads the page. It clears out the inputs. This is good for a lot of things and also not what you want for a lot of other things. Like now I have to go type in the thing again and put in my password again. And it's kind of annoying. Like ideally you want to persist those values across your attempts at submitting. And this is actually pretty easy to do, but it's a bug right now and I want to fix it. So let's take a look. I have two routes underneath login. The route group, I have sign up and sign in that are basically doing the same thing. They just use this abstraction for a login component and then they have a different prop for sign up or sign in. So let's dive into that. Inside of this login component, which is what we're looking at over here on the right, we can ignore these for a minute and let's focus on use action state. Use action state is a hook in React 19 that allows you to basically, you send it or you pass in an action, a server action or a client action, and some initial state. And then you can also read the previous state. So what we're doing right now is we have the state, which takes in some default value here, which is just, there's no error. The action that we want to send, which in this instance is either sign in or sign up. And we're getting back that action that we can forward along, form action, that we can forward along to our form. So, and then the third one here is pending. And the pending is so that we can disable our button and show a loading spinner. So that's kind of how this works right now. But what I want to change is I want to be able to kind of derive the input values from the state of use action state. So it would be great if, for example, I have this state that I get back from use action state. It would be great if on the input, where I've got this email input, I can just do something like default value equals state.email. And for here, we could do default value equals state.password. It would be amazing if I could just read those values and populate it. But to do that, I'm going to need to actually go into my server actions here, sign in and sign up. And you're going to notice a couple things. One, they're using those wrappers that I mentioned, kind of like local middlewares. One is called a validated action. And what this is doing is it is validating the input against this Zod schema of an email and a password. So we'll just automatically throw errors back if you're not matching that schema. We get back the email and the password based on our schema. We do some update in our database with Drizzle. And then here, if there's, if the length of the user with team, aka we get nothing back from the database, we're saying this is invalid and we're forwarding the error back. What we really want to do here is also return back the object with the user and the password, because this object, I think it was it username maybe? Username? Oh, email. There. Email and password. Because this object is essentially like returning a response from your API. So we go here and we're saying, oh, compare our passwords. Cool. If the password is invalid, then we're going to return invalid email or password. So for here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say email, password. Cool. And I think I'll save. Let me try this again. Test@test.com. I'm going to hit sign up. Okay. So that didn't work. Oh, wait. I know why. I just changed sign in instead of sign up. So let's also change. I need to do both. Similar thing here with email and password, where we want to find where we're returning the objects. We'll return email and password. And I think there's one more down here. Email, password. Is that it? One more. Uno más. Cool. Okay, let's try it again. Test@test.com. Blah, blah, blah. Still nothing. Sign up. Let's double check. Sign up. Oh. I scrolled right past it. Email, password. Cool. Let's try it one more time. Okay, there we go. So you see the message failed to create a user, but the values for the email and the password were returned as the object, and I was able to read those values from the state that's derived here, and I can use back in my component. So I can do state.email and use that value. Let me answer some questions in the chat. The password should be emptied though. Maybe. It kind of depends. Like, did you have a typo on the password or did you have a typo on the email? It might be either. I don't think there's an issue with that, but let me know what you think. Why not use PHP? This is basically PHP. How do you scroll so fast in NeoVim? I turned up my tracking on scrolling in general. Like, I know you're supposed to use the what is it? Is it no? It's not that. What is it? I think is it P? Is it Command P? No, I don't remember what it is. So like move by page. Sure, I could do that, but I kind of like scrolling this way. Like I want to see the context of what's happening. Love the syntax you're using for the server functions. Yeah, the wrapped validation, it just makes a lot more sense to me. Is persisting password value secure? So you can kind of think about this like the response that you're sending, like the body, the JSON body that you're sending from client to server of the input values. So whatever password you input here is getting sent off to the server somewhere, and then on the server you're doing the secure check where you have. Let's find where that's at. Or did I already pass it? Oh, this is making a new user. Sign up would be a better example. So we get the password that's been included in the payload, and then we also compare that against the user that we found from the database, and we compare passwords using this function from bcrypt, which compares the hashed password. Yeah. Other questions? Why is Next.js moving towards directives instead of wrapper functions or decorators. So there's just a lot of stuff that you can do with a compiler and a directive that is not easy when you're trying to use a function. And a good example with use cache is, let me see if I have a good example. So like one thing, for example, here, if you're wrapping this with a function, you have to be very explicit about what is going into the cache key, because if customer ID ever changes, this needs to be invalidated. We need to have different cache entries based on the customer ID, and getting that right, in a trivial example, it might not seem that bad, but getting that right, especially with things like closures, can be tricky and ultimately is not something that you want to think about as a dev. I mean, maybe some of you do, but I much prefer just to think in a very atomic, composable way. Like, okay, this function, I want to cache it, and I want to cache it for, some amount of time, and I can define what I want that time to be. Just similar to adding cache control headers on an HTTP request. The great thing about use cache is it is like composable caching, and directives just make it much easier to jump in between the different layers of Next.js. You have the client layer, the server layer, and the cache layer is also kind of like a separate layer. It's more than just the compiler transform. There's also runtime evaluation. Do I mean auto-generating the key given the parameters? Yes, that's what I meant. I might have said that incorrectly, but that's what I mean. It's able to automatically figure out the cache key for you. I mean, that's really the magic of the compiler here. It can't do it for everything. And when it can't do it for something, the compiler is really smart and it creates a reference. And you can think about the reference like a pointer to some value that's going to be evaluated at runtime. And then at runtime, it kind of works like a server function. When you can think of server function as the broader category around server actions, there's some function that's being evaluated to determine if that should be cached, because there was no way to statically analyze with the compiler and figure out what those values should be in the cache key. So I think it's pretty awesome. Are there plans for shallow routing in the Next.js app router? So we already support this today. With window, you can just directly do window dot, where's it at in here? Window.history.push state or replace state. A lot of times, like a pair to this ask is usually you're trying to do some kind of mutation, and generally, like you're trying to do a mutation and then as a side effect, update the URL. One example of that I have seen in my own testing is, for example, let's say I'm going here and I want to change these options. Well, I do want these to be persisted as URL params so that I can send them to people, but I don't want it to block on my UI interaction. So if I click these, I want this, but I want to be able to move quickly between here and not have to worry about that blocking things when it's synchronizing state with the server. Same thing with changing the images or adding it to my cart, updating the quantity. Like I want all these things to feel instant, even though they're synchronizing with a server somewhere else. And everything you just saw felt instant because of the use optimistic hook from React. You first show the optimistic state, and then as a side effect of that, basically, then I'm going and updating. In the first case is the URL, in this case, the server. So we say optimistically the quantity is going to be 9, and then we resolve that with the server state when we get back the response that says, yep, it indeed was 9. So for a lot of times when I see people talk about shallow routing or quick transitions between things, it's usually related to use optimistic. But yeah, there's also these as well. And then we're also have some more improvements we're cooking here for some of the more advanced use cases. Question, where is that value going to be cached, in the client machine or on the server? So when you're doing use cache, you're caching that value on the server. But there's also a routing cache in Next.js when you're going between pages, so that if you fetch some data and you load a page and then you want to go back to another page, ideally you don't want to have to go refetch all of that data. You want the transitions between pages to be really quick. I think, honestly, for all intents and purposes, most of the time, you shouldn't need to worry about the different layers of the Next.js cache. I think that in the past, we probably talked about them too much, so I'm hesitant to like go into exquisite detail. What we instead want to do is just make it really clear how you mark something as stale, how you mark something as never cache this thing, and how you mark something as always cache this thing. Because the heuristics around like, what is the time between navigating pages and how does that affect the router cache? Like in most cases, you should never touch any of that stuff. But for advanced cases, we allow you to configure those values through configuration. Question about using a server.js file. So I don't know what you mean by server.js. Do you mean route.js potentially? To interact with OpenAI APIs, I want to protect the source code. Is there a way to hide the source code? If you are doing anything in a server component, you can ensure that the only thing that gets sent to the client is the output HTML. So if you connect to an AI application and you have a API key there, that API key is not being sent to the browser. It's only the output, even if you're streaming that response back. Is Next.js working on type-safe routes? We do. That's not what I want. We do have this typed routes experimental option. We want to continue making TypeScript improvements next year and hopefully stabilize something like this, but nothing right now other than this experimental option. Is there an easy way to pass server-side state to the client side? Yeah, it kind of depends on the example. I mean, if the server-side state is URL state, like it's the response from some external URL, the pattern I was showing earlier with a promise that you then forward to React context and you unwrap using the use hook, I think this is one of the best ways, personally. So let me know if that's kind of what you had in mind. Do you know when Vercel's custom environments are going to happen? It was almost today. I think it might be tomorrow or the day after that. It's very soon. Pretty soon you'll be able to define, in the UI, more granular environments, whether that's staging or pre-prod, 1, 2, 3, test, final, like whatever you want, you'll be able to define those in a much easier way. But that should be hopefully coming soon. So we've been kind of cooking on that one for some time now, and yeah, it's getting close. Other questions, or I'm happy to also just riff a little bit more on this demo app and talk about some of the features of it, which I think are kind of interesting, and maybe you'll feel the same way. So one thing that I like that I've been doing a lot with my database applications, anything that has a database, is this general structure with libdb in my Drizzle app. So this file is just actually connecting to Postgres.js, which, oops, I deleted everything. Postgres.js, which is just a nice client for using, any Postgres provider, Supabase, Neon, you name it. Drizzle also has migrations built in. Prisma has migrations built in. Like a lot of these new ORMs are just making it way easier to do database migrations. So that's nice. Then I put all my queries in one file just to delineate between things that are getters versus setters, because the setters are effectively server actions. Then I have my schema here, which in this app, it's a kind of simple SaaS app. So we have some users that are part of teams. Those team members make this connection between the user and the team. We have activity logs, which is building kind of like an audit log or trail of the app. You can invite people to teams. So we have an invitations table. And then down at the bottom, we define some of the relations between teams and users and invites. And then I also export a bunch of types to use. So you can derive a TypeScript type to use and add it like a prop, for example, somewhere on your component, which I think is nice. And then, what else do I have here? An enum for the activity type. So these are like the logs that I want to make in my app, which I actually really like the way this is structured, just to show you an example. In this function, sign in, we do some work, and in most enterprisey, most real apps, you have some kind of log or audit log or activity log, or whether that's publicly exposed or internally tracked to keep track of actions. So we do all this work, and then we get down to here, and I'm calling kind of both of these things in parallel. I have setting the session with the new user that we got, so it can update all the places where I was referencing the user, but then also log activity. So log activity, log in the team, the user, and then that's where this enum comes into place. As I can go in here and I can say, whatever I want, any of these options, I get my nice type safety, and it's easy to access those. And then log activity is a little helper function that I have here that just inserts a new row into the database. So just a helpful little thing, but I kind of like that. Follow-up question regarding the web application firewall. If requests have a malicious SQL injection in them, for example, on a GET param, can we define a custom rule in the WAF and deny those requests? Yes, you can. And let me pull up a new window and we can just take a look at what that would look like. So here's my app, Next.js starter that we're looking at over here. I'm going to go check out the firewall for this, which looks like we've got some traffic here. And let's see, the question was, you want to prevent SQL injection or just block things based on certain query parameters. So one thing you can do, we have a managed rule set for this on enterprise. It's just like you turn on a button and it just protects from a bunch of these OWASP top 10 rules, which are basically like known attack patterns. But you can just build whatever you want with our kind of rule builder. So let's see, we probably would want something like query equals something, post, or query equals post, and the value is, let's do, I don't know what I want to do here. What's the best example? Exists. If there's any query param that is post, then we can deny it, we can challenge it, we can rate limit it. It's all built in. We can redirect it. Let's do deny, and then you can basically set a duration for how long you want this to be. So maybe I want that to, if you make any subsequent requests, you're blocked for some amount of time, and then you don't get billed for that. So if somebody's attacking your site and you just don't want them to have access and you don't want to get billed for that usage, slap a duration on there. So we'll save this test, we'll save this rule and go in and apply it. And next SaaS start, we're here. And then if I add in post equals hello stream, I blocked myself. So I blocked myself from the firewall. It applies globally in 300 milliseconds, so it's really quick to update, really powerful for you to define, basically whatever rules you want. And you can go in here and, I'll look at traffic over the past day, and I can see, looks like there's been, 26,000 requests here. We've automatically mitigated a few malicious requests, and then I can also see the specific rule I just added, test, and it was called one time. So that is how that works. I'm actually going to turn this off just so I don't forget. Cool. Other questions? Should I use transactions instead of promise.all? In this instance, this session is not a database call. I don't think. I'm pretty sure this is just setting it. Yeah, it's just setting the cookie. So there isn't anything in the database that I need to put inside of a transaction. But generally, you're right. For a series of database actions where I want to roll them back, it would be nice to put those in a transaction for sure. How can I have a loading state when changing URL params in a server component that will then fetch different data? So a loading state when you change the URL params in a server component that will fetch different data. One thing you can do is if you have a page that's fetching data, you can use the loading.tsx file, which allows you to display a loading state. So when you have a server component that's fetching data and then you change the query parameters that are fed into that data fetch, your UI is now going to start loading and it's going to show some skeleton. Maybe an example here is this app I built, Next book search. If my database is still alive, I built this a while ago. So there's a bunch of books. And if I want to search for a book, Harry Potter, I want that to update the URL, but I want to see some loading state while I'm waiting for that. And I also want to be able to, toggle things on the left that update URL state. Maybe I want Spanish books, English books, books from, a long time ago. Some of these queries are slower than others because I don't think I have the indexes perfectly calibrated. So some of them are super fast. Some of them I hit pass where I need to add more indexes on my table. But yeah, let me try one Lord of the Rings. I like the loading animation I have, which if you watch over here on the right, I've got this little spinner thing, which is kind of nice. I just think it looks pretty cool. So that's one example. This code's all open source. If you want to check it out, the link's down here in the bottom right. Let me know if that answers your question. Should I use try catch in a server action? So generally, this is my PSA, and it's been hard for me to rewrite my own behavior. I don't know about y'all, but it feels like sometimes TypeScript incentivizes you to just put try catches everywhere. Because you're thinking, I'm making my application have better error handling. But it actually is kind of an anti-pattern sometimes with server actions, unless you're explicitly expecting an uncaught error. So, for example, inside of this action, I have to ask myself, what happens when something goes wrong? If something blows up here, I either have an uncaught exception or I have a handled error. And if I have a handled error, I want to show some UI. I want to send something back to the user. So when you sign in, a handled error, for example, is there was an invalid email or password. I don't want to try catch here. I want to return back some message to the client. Now, yes, you could say, okay, well then I have all these database queries. Shouldn't I just wrap this whole thing in try catch? And then if it fails, then I return something back. You could, but it's kind of an anti-pattern because that to me is more of an uncaught exception. I don't expect my database to fail. If my database fails, I probably want to show an error. I keep doing that. I want to show an error.js file. This is what happens when there's an uncaught, unexpected runtime error. You can show some UI. It's not the normal flow of my code. And if you start throwing try catch everywhere, it can kind of get out of hand. You still want to handle your errors. It's just we have a built-in convention that handles the unexpected runtime errors. So I would recommend reading this doc. I recently made it a little bit more clear. My camera seems to have shut off because my DSLR is burning the midnight hours here. I'll see if I'll just reset it. But I would recommend reading this air handling doc. Should hopefully answer those questions. And I just recently updated it as well. Yeah, my camera, even though I have the, I hook it into a persistent power outlet. I'm not running it based on like a camera battery. My DSLR still heats up, and I've had it on for like 8 hours today. So I'm not surprised. Speaking of that, it's probably about time for me to go eat dinner with my family. So the baby is calling and the wife is calling. So if there's any last questions, we can wrap them up here in the minute, and then we'll call it for this stream talking about 15.1. Hopefully this was helpful just to walk through the blog post, talk through this little demo app I've been cooking up. Let me check on the chat. Let me check on the stream. Man, the X stream is really pumping. Lots of folks tuning in on X. That's fun. And lots of folks chatting from Twitch too. So thanks for hanging out on Twitch and subscribing if you aren't. Thanks, Lee, for the stream. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. This has been fun. I stream semi-regularly whenever there's something of whenever there's something of importance. So if there's a Next.js release, I'll try to stream and talk about it. If you upgrade to 15.1, let me know how it goes. Shoot me a tweet, shoot me a message. Would love to hear. Hopefully everything's good. If it's not, let me know and we can kind of make it a little bit better. I thought the stream was about Black Friday. That's the only reason I tuned in. Very funny. Very funny. Alrighty. Well, that'll wrap it up for this stream. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.